I'm Rob Rubin, and we are here to interview one of the town of Poughkeepsie's former supervisors, Ann Barcher, whom I might say I know, and it's a pleasure to deal with her. So, and thank you folks for coming and doing this interview. You're a great asset to the community and to the Wappinger Central School District. Ann, thank you for coming. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? For instance, where did you grow up? And perhaps where did you go to school? I see on your resume you had a number of impressive degrees that I'd like you to talk about a little.
All right, I'll start with where I was born, which was in Schenectady, New York. My family was from that area. We moved to the town of Poughkeepsie when I was 3 months old. We have lived in the house where you picked me up today since 1955. I went through the Spackenkill schools, starting with the Martha W. Lawrence School, and then the Orville Todd Middle School. And then they ran out of schools. We didn't have a high school back in those days. So I was bused into the city of Poughkeepsie. And I graduated in 1966. I was valedictorian. And then I went off to, well, we used to call it Radcliffe. Actually it's Harvard. I spent 4 years there. I studied government. I was always interested in government. And in fact, very early on had the ambition to become an attorney. And mind you, this was back in the days when women very rarely did that. But my father was very supportive. My mother, I'm afraid, said, "Well, dear, you can always do something more interesting afterward." I don't think she quite meant it the way it sounded. So I graduated from Harvard in 1970. In 72, I began law school and then left for 2 years with my ex-husband. Took a year at the Harvard Divinity School, which was a wonderful experience. I was studying comparative religion and Buddhism with Professor Nagatomi. And if we had time, I would go into his background, but I have described him as the most beautiful person I've ever met. And I'm not talking about his facial features, but about his heart and soul. He was wonderful. And I seriously debated whether I should become a Buddhist scholar or should I go back to law school. I spent a summer out in Boulder, Colorado with one of my Radcliffe friends debating this way, that way, this way, that way. And I finally decided that I could do more good for people if I became an attorney. That it was somewhat self-indulgent to stay in Cambridge and study with this wonderful professor in a very sheltered kind of existence. So I decided to go back to law school. I went back to NYU in New York, and I got my first degree. I went to work briefly for the city of New York as a planner. I was out of title. And then I went to the Port Authority. And I worked in Tower 1.
In the World Trade Center.
In the World Trade Center, the tower that was hit first, and where I had friends, including my closest female friend. She was late getting up to her office that day because she had decided to buy something for her daughter on the concourse level and was able to get out.
You were the supervisor of the town during that period then?
No, I wasn't yet. I came back here. I got a second law degree in international legal studies. And then I came back here. My mother wanted someone to stay with her. She was alone in the house. And so I came back here in 1992. And I was a little bit horrified and certainly perplexed at the political atmosphere I found in this town. People were afraid. They were afraid to buck the Republican establishment. We had, at that time, we had a gentleman named Bill Paroli Sr., who was head of the Republican County Committee, the Town Republican Committee, and he was also the Commissioner of Elections for the Republican side. And at that time, because of the balance was still in favor of Republicans, the only people who got elected around here were Republicans that he had approved of. And our town clerk has told me an anecdote that she tried to hire somebody for summer employment who was the son of somebody who was a member in good standing of the Republican Party. And when Bill Paroli found out, he told her, "You've got to fire him. Nobody gets employed around here without my permission." So I came along and I said, this is intolerable. There were a number of, well, I'll call them suspicious deaths. Someone might say there were murders, but at least suspicious deaths. There was a transaction to purchase what is now the police station and courts that belonged to the ESPYs, and there were irregularities in that transaction. One of the irregularities, and I've been told this by several Republicans, not Democrats, but Republicans that I knew and became friends with me, that there was an unauthorized and illegal meeting of the town board at Bill Paroli's house. And there was a contract for the purchase of I call it the ESPY building still, purchase of the ESPY building. And he said, no, you got to increase the sale price. Increase the sale price after you have a contract. So the town board, which was all Republican in those days, obediently agreed at this irregular meeting. And the transaction went through in, I think in September of 1996. And I've seen some of the papers that suggest that within 3 days of the closing that the ESPYs had Fed-wired $1.9 million to an unknown person. So I spoke to Maurice Hinchey, who was, of course, not congressman for this area, Sue Kelly was, but she was not helpful. Maurice Hinchey said, I'd like to bring in the FBI to investigate some of these matters. And so that was done. There was an investigation in the town of Poughkeepsie from 1996 to 2000. And when the FBI went into the building department here in arrested a couple of people. The populace realized, that there was in fact something going on.
Is that when you decided to get involved in the local political scenery here, that you decided to run for office, for supervisor?
I don't know whether it was before or after the arrests, but I had been, of course, following the situation very closely and was very, very interested in what was happening. So at some point there, I did make a decision to become supervisor, to see what I could do to help clean up the mess, the political corruption that we had here. Now, meanwhile, Bill Paroli had been arrested on a charge of conspiracy to commit extortion. But there's no other conspirators named, and I've never seen before a case in which you have one conspirator. But anyway, and sometime between the time I was nominated to run for supervisor and my election, he was sent off to federal prison for, I believe it was 22 months.
I tend to see that you have something in you that you want to do good for your fellow community person, your fellow people here, and you wanted to see the town go on a different course.
Well, I very much wanted to see the town go on a different course. It was clear to me, and with the training that I've had as an attorney, it's obvious that there was political corruption, that a number of very serious crimes had been committed. I could mention a couple of things. One, I think it's a crime. It's been officially classified as a suicide, but Bill Rousey, who was brought into the town of Poughkeepsie by Bill Paroli to be the assessor for the town of Poughkeepsie, was apprehended one morning by the FBI and allegedly questioned for several hours. And again, allegedly, because I wasn't privy to these conversations, but allegedly then went to Bill Paroli and said, "We have a problem." To which allegedly Bill Paroli said, "No, you have a problem." And about 2 days later, Bill Rousey disappeared. And a few days after that was found floating face down in the Hudson River. Now, again, this is a man whom I met him once in town hall, but I didn't know him really. But I've been told that he had a severe phobia about water, would never, this person was of the opinion that he would never have committed suicide by drowning. He owned a gun. Anyway, so that I view as, although it's been officially classified as a suicide, I remain skeptical. There was also a young woman who was married to a police officer, the town police, and she apparently had an affair with Fred Andros, who was head of the water department. Decided finally to go back to her husband, and she was murdered outside of a church, in a church parking lot. And someone who has seen the pictures, which I have not, has said that it was a gangland style murder. Lots of holes in the vehicle. So there was that. There's some other things that have happened around here that I can't say that the same person was involved in all of them. But I can say that I was very disappointed in the way the FBI investigated matters here. I don't think they did justice by the town of Poughkeepsie. They're unresolved issues here.
The golden rule, is that really the type of thing that you guide yourself by?
The golden rule, yes. I try not only in my political dealings, but in my legal dealings, and we'll get into that, I guess, in a while, and in terms of the political asylum and immigration work that I've been doing for the last 20 years. Compassion, integrity, and sometimes, frankly, a sense of outrage. When I see...
At what?
A sense of outrage at people who are corrupt, who are stealing money from the public, who are harming people just because they can. My feeling, and this was part of my motivation in becoming supervisor, someone who perhaps has the training or predisposition to improve situations has also an obligation. I mean, I knew when I became supervisor that it might be a rough road.
By the way, let me bring you to that first day. You were on your white horse riding up to town hall for your inauguration, and you see the sign outside of Poughkeepsie Town Hall with the name Supervisor Ann Barcher. What were your thoughts at that very first time?
I don't really remember what my first thoughts were, except I realized when I took this job that it was not going to be easy, that there were people who had a vested interest in seeing that things did not change around here. And
was that what you considered your major obstacle when you first came on board?
Yes, some of whom were Democrats. I was elected, four people on the Democratic slate were also elected as council people. And my mother later dubbed them the Gang of Four. They were obstructionists. Some of them apparently had a connection to parolee through the town attorney, Jim Coombs. They did everything they could to thwart me. I had many, sitting right here at this spot, I had many 6-1 votes. Now, I was in a situation starting about the third month of my first year. My mother was very upset about the way I was being treated, about the hecklers that somebody was bussing in to disrupt meetings and that kind of thing. She had a stroke. My mother had a stroke. I found her when I returned from an interview at a TV studio. And she never totally recovered her ability to speak. And my mother was an English teacher and a teacher of dramatics and had been a very articulate woman. And she...
Is that her?
This is Mom. It's,
quite a lovely woman.
Yeah. Well, she was an inspiration in my life. She was just incredible. Anyway, when my mother could communicate with me, she said, "Ann, I want you to promise that you won't run for another term as supervisor. So I promised, and I haven't, although there have been times I've been tempted. But a promise is a promise, especially to your own mother, she's now deceased. So I knew after 3 months into my term that I was not going to run again. I felt I didn't have to curry favor with anyone, that I would always vote in the interests of the people of the town of Poughkeepsie, and not with an eye toward, gee, am I going to get somebody to support me for re-election, because I knew I wasn't going for re-election. I'm actually proud of some of the votes I took, because they were 6-1 votes. And I don't know who exactly was coordinating the votes on the other side, but I can say I stand by every vote I ever took.
If you can recall back to those days, do you have one moment that you consider your greatest success as a supervisor in the town?
As I say, I'm proud of some of the votes I took. I'm proud of some of the other things that I did. I could tell you about the Trimuni venture.
I was going to ask you about that, because you've been a member. You were a member of that, the Tri-Municipal Sewer Commission.
Yes, actually, one of the things that I did when I became supervisor and was in a position maybe to get on some of these other commissions, I looked around to see where the money was. And I was told that there was what they call an exchange order federal account at Trimuni that had not been dissolved for a long, long time. It was accumulating money. And by the time I got on the Trimuni board, there was $1.1 million in money that belonged to the 3 municipalities, town of Poughkeepsie, town of Wappingers, and village of Wappingers Falls. That was our money. And so I also got myself appointed treasurer and took a look at the books. And there was something going on which I characterize as money laundering, using a federal account. And it was very interesting. I'll just, if I can tell you quickly what somebody was doing. At the beginning of the month, a number of checks were written amounting to $29,000 and change. At the end of the month, the money was redeposited in cash. The next month, $29,000 in checks. One of them always went to a certain attorney who had been prohibited from getting any money from this account. And this went on month after month after month. And it was clear to me that the money that was being put back at the end of the month was obviously not the money that was represented by the checks, all of which had been cashed. I mean, people don't do that. It was money coming from, well, the possibilities are drug trafficking, corruption, there are various other nefarious sources. So the FBI came in again, and I had an FBI agent sitting in my office trying to see if I had any more information about what was going on here. Remember, this was a federal account, so they took interest. And the person who I think had directed the FBI agent to come talk to me was Mary Jo White, who's now recently been appointed to the SEC. But she was at that time the district, I think the title is District Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Now, I don't know what happened finally with their investigation because I suggested at a subsequent meeting of the Trimuni that the change order count be terminated and the money turned over to the municipalities who were entitled to it. The town of Poughkeepsie, as I recall, got $540,000. So somebody may have gotten away with money laundering, but at least we got our money back and we could use it to offset, some of the expenses that we incur. I felt very gratified at that. But I have no idea how many similar things I might have missed. And I, from time to time, talk to somebody who is in elective office, and I'll say, this is what I found. There were money laundering. Might have been drug money, might have been corruption, might have been whatever. But whatever it was highly improper. The attorney whom I believe set up the arrangement at Trimuni, who was counsel to Trimuni, and also counsel to the county legislature, could he have set this up? Could he have set it up in other parts of the county? I don't know. I have always wished that I had some responsible person, courageous and responsible, who would take a look, do an audit, forensic audit of all of the books of the town of Poughkeepsie. Now, from time to time, we see problems. Comptroller DiNapoli said that the finances of the town of Poughkeepsie were in poor shape. I don't know why they should be in poor shape, but somebody who's in office now should look into the finances. I mean, really thoroughly look into the finances. And it should be done not only in the town, but it should be done in the county, and it should be done in the state, and maybe in the nation. This is our money. This is the taxpayers' money. Now, there's some taxpayers who probably don't care if they lose a couple $100,000. I don't happen to know any of those. But integrity in government, the conviction that your government is not only representing you, but is being careful about your money, I think it's essential in a democracy.
And that is a great segue into my next question for you. How would you like future historians to view you?
To be honest, I would like to be seen as a reformer, but a reformer who wasn't always successful in her reforms, but perhaps try to point the way to a few other individuals in terms of what it means to be a public servant.
And if you could give some advice to young people in the future concerning politics, what would you say to them?
Well, it's a question of whether or not you mean politics or government. We need people who have honesty and integrity and competence and dedication, and people who are willing to put themselves in the public limelight. Now, I must confess there were days when I had more more limelight than I wanted, of sometimes a disagreeable sort. But I mean, anyone who goes into the political realm has got to accept the fact that, you know, there will be difficult days, and I mean, we have, I don't know if I should mention a current figure, but we have a candidate for Secretary of Defense, for instance, Mr. Hagel, Senator Hagel. I've been watching the hearings, and I'm saying to myself, this man is getting a lot of abuse, which I don't think he deserves, from people who are improperly motivated. It's a personal vendetta, I think, in some cases. And when I see that, you know, I say, well, I mean, you have to accept that in politics you're going to get a certain amount of that. I wish when I had become supervisor, I had selected my running mates. I didn't know the people who were elected, and I got to know them soon enough. But you know, having a team of people who can go into a situation and work as a team and have a common goal is very important.
Is there anything else that you would like to add, like to say to people at this point?
Well, I'm tempted to say that there is a life after supervisor of the town of Poughkeepsie, and I am very happily pursuing immigration law, which is a wonderful field. You work with people who really appreciate what you're doing, because in some cases you're keeping them from being deported, you're making sure that they can get green cards and citizenship, and you know, and it is a very satisfying area of law to practice in. There are times, though, when I look at what's happening in the body politic and saying, should I ignore what I told my mother and get back in? Usually I sober up.
Thank you, Ann.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.